Chapter 1. It was Mrs. May who first told me about them. No, not me. How could it have been me, a wild, untidy, self-willed little girl who stared with angry eyes and was not to crunch her teeth? Kate, she should have been called. Yes, that was it. Kate. Not that the name matters much either way. She barely comes into the story. Mrs. May lived in 2 rooms in Kate's parents' house in London. She was, I think, some kind of relation. Her bedroom was on the first floor, and her sitting room was a room which, as part of the house, was called the breakfast room. Now, breakfast rooms are all right in the morning when the sun streams in on the toast and marmalade, but by afternoon, they seem to vanish a little and to fill with a strange silvery light, their own twilight. There is a kind of sadness in them, but as a child, it was a sadness Kate liked. She would creep into Miss May just before tea time, and Mrs. May would teach her how to crochet. Mrs. May was old and her joints were stiff, and she was not strict. Exactly. But she had that inner certainty which does instead. Kate was never wild with Mrs. May, nor untidy, nor self-willed, and Mrs. May taught her many things besides crochet: how to wind wool into an egg-shaped ball, how to run and fell, plan a darn, how to tidy a drawer and lay like a blessing above the contents a sheet of rustling tissue against the dust. "Where's your work, child?" asked Mrs. May one day when Kate sat hunched and silent upon the hassock. "You mustn't sit there dreaming. Have you lost your tongue?" "No," said Kate, pulling at her shoe button. "I've lost the crochet hook." They were making a bed quilt in woolen squares. There were 30 still to do. "I know where I put it," she went on hastily. "I put it on the bottom shelf of the bookcase just beside my bed." "On the bottom shelf," repeated Mrs. May, her own needle flickering steady in the firelight. "Near the floor?" "Yes," said Kate. "But I looked on the floor, under the rug, everywhere. The wool was still there, though, just where I left it." "Oh, dear," exclaimed Mrs. May lightly. "I don't say. They're in this house, too." "They are what?" asked Kate. "The borrowers," said Mrs. May, and in a half light she seemed to smile. Kate stared a little fearfully. "Are there such things?" she asked after a moment. "As what? As other people living in a house who borrow things?" Mrs. May laid down her work. "What do you think?" she asked. "I don't know," Kate said, pulling hard at her shoe button. "There can't be. And yet," she raised her head, "and yet sometimes I think there must be." "Why do you think there must be?" asked Mrs. May. "Because of all the things that disappear. Safety pins, for instance. Factories go on making safety pins, and every day people go on buying safety pins. And yet, somehow, there never is a safety pin just when you need one. Where are they all? Now, at this minute, where do they go to? Take needles," she went on. "All the needles my mother ever bought. There must be hundreds. Can't be lying about this house." "Not lying about the house. No," agreed Mrs. May. "And all the other things we keep on buying, again and again and again, like pencils and matchboxes and sealing wax and hairpins and drawing pins and thimbles, hat pins," put in Mrs. May, "and blotting paper." "Yes, blotting paper," agreed Kate, "but not hat pins." "That's where you're wrong," said Mrs. May, and she picked her work up again. "There was a reason for hat pins." Kate stared. "A reason?" she repeated. "I mean, what kind of reason?" "Well, there were 2 reasons, really. A hat pin is a very useful weapon, and—" Mrs. May laughed suddenly. "But it all sounds such nonsense," and she hesitated. "It was so very long ago." "But tell me," said Kate. "Tell me how you know about the hat pin. Did you ever see one?" Mrs. May threw her a startled glance. "Well, yes," she began. Not a hat pin, exclaimed Kate impatiently. A, whatever you call them, a borrower? Mrs. May drew a sharp breath. No, she said quickly. I never saw one. But someone else saw one, cried Kate, and you know about it. I can see you do. Hush, said Mrs. May. No need to shout. She gazed downwards at the upturned face, and then she smiled and her eyes slid away into distance. I had a brother, she began uncertainly. Kate knelt upon the hassock. And he saw them? I don't know, said Mrs. May, shaking her head. I just don't know. She smoothed out her work upon her knee. He was such a tease. He told us so many things. My sister and me, impossible things. He was killed, she added gently, many years ago on the Northwest frontier. He became a colonel of his regiment. He died what they called a hero's death. Was he your only brother? Yes, and he was our little brother. I think that was why, she thought for a moment, smiling, still smiling to herself. Yes, why he told us such impossible stories, such strange imaginings. He was jealous, I think, because we were older and because we could read better. He wanted to impress us. He wanted perhaps to shock us. And yet, she looked into the fire. There was something about him. Perhaps because we were brought up in India among mystery and magic and legend, something that made us think that he saw things that other people could not see. Sometimes we'd know he was teasing, but at other times, well, we were not so sure. She leaned forward and in her tidy way brushed a fan of loose ashes under the grate. Then, brush in hand, she stared again at the fire. He wasn't a very strong little boy. The first time he came home from India, he got rheumatic fever. He missed a whole term at school and was sent away to the country to get over it, to the house of a great aunt. Later, I went there myself. It was a strange old house. She hung up the brush on the brass hook and, dusting her hands on her handkerchief, she picked up her work. Better light the lamp, she said. Not yet, begged Kate, leaning forward. Please go on. Please tell me. But I've told you. No, you haven't. This old house, wasn't that where he saw? Mrs. May laughed. Where he saw the borrowers? Yes, that's what he told us, what he'd have us believe. And what's more, it seemed that he didn't just see them, but that he got to know them very well, that he became a part of their lives, as it were. In fact, you might almost say that he became a borrower himself. Oh, do tell, please. Please try to remember right from the very beginning. But I do remember, said Mrs. May. Oddly enough, I remember it better than many real things which have happened. And perhaps it was a real thing. I don't know. You see, on the way back to India, my brother and I had to share a cabin. My sister used to sleep with our governess, and on those very hot nights, often we couldn't sleep. And my brother would talk for hours and hours, going over old ground, repeating conversations, telling me details again and again, wondering how they were and what they were doing. And they? Who were they? Exactly. Homily, Pod, and little Arrietty. Pod? Yes, even their names were never quite right. They imagined they had their own names, quite different from human names. But with half an ear, you could tell they were borrowed. Even Uncle Hendry and Eglantina's, everything they had was borrowed. They had nothing of their own at all. Nothing. In spite of all this, my brother said they were touchy and conceited and thought they owned the world. How do you mean? They thought human beings were just invented to do the dirty work, great slaves put there for them to use. At least that's what they told each other. But my brother said that underneath he thought they were frightened. It was because they were frightened, he thought, that they had grown so small. Each generation had become smaller and smaller and more hidden. In the old days, it seemed, in parts of England, our ancestors talked quite openly about these little people. Yes, said Kate, I know. Nowadays, I suppose, Mrs. May went on slowly, if they exist at all, you would only find them in houses which are old and quiet and deep in the country, and where the human beings live to a routine. Routine is their safeguard. They must know which rooms are to be used and when. They do not stay long where there are careless people or unruly children or certain household pets. This particular old house, of course, was ideal, and as far as some of them were concerned, a trifle cold and empty. Great Aunt Sophie was bedridden through a hunting accident some 20 years before. And as for the other human beings, there was only Mrs. Driver, the cook, Crampfurl, the gardener, and at rare intervals, an odd housemaid or such. My brother, too, when he first went there after rheumatic fever, had spent long hours in bed, and those first weeks, it seemed, the borrowers did not know of his existence. He slept in the old night nursery beyond the schoolroom. The schoolroom at that time was sheeted and shrouded and filled with junk: old trunks, a broken sewing machine, a desk, a dressmaker's dummy, a table, some chairs, disused pianola, as the children who had used it. Great Aunt Sophie's children had long since grown up, married, died, or gone away. The night nursery opened out of the schoolroom, and from his bed my brother could see the oil painting of the Battle of Waterloo, which hung above the schoolroom fireplace, and on the wall a corner cupboard with glass doors, in which was set out on hooks and shelves a doll's tea service, very delicate and old. At night, if the schoolroom door was open, he had a view down the lighted passage, which led to the head of the stairs, and it would comfort him to see each evening at dusk Mrs. Driver appear at the head of the stairs and cross the passage carrying a tray for Aunt Sophie with Bath Oliver biscuits and a tall cut glass decanter of fine old pale Madeira. On her way out, Mrs. Driver would pause and lower the gas jet in the passage to a dim blue flame, and then he would watch as she stumped down the downstairs, sinking slowly out of sight between the banisters. Under this passage and the hallway there was a clock, and through the night he would hear it strike the hours. It was a grandfather clock and very old. Mr. Frith of Leighton Buzzard came each month to wind it as his father had come before him, and his great uncle before that. For 80 years, they said, and to Mr. Frith's certain knowledge, it had not stopped, and as far as anyone could tell, for as many years before that. The great thing was that it must never be moved. It stood against the wainscot, and the stone flags around it had been washed so often that a little platform, my brother said, had rose up inside. And under this clock, below the wainscot, there was a hole. Chapter 2. It was Pod's hole, the keep of his fortress, the entrance to his home. Not that his home was anywhere near the clock, far from it, as you might say. There were yards of dark and dusty passageway, with wooden doors between joints and metal gates against the mice. Pod used all kinds of things for these gates: a flat leaf of a folding cheese grater, the hinge lid of a small cash box, squares of pierced zinc from an old meat safe, a wire fly swatter. Not that I'm afraid of mice, Homily would say, but I can't abide the smell. In vain, Arrietty had begged for a little mouse of her own, a little blind mouse to bring up by hand like Eglatina had. But Eglatina would bang with pan's lids and exclaim, and look what happened to Eglatina. What? Arrietty would ask. What did happen to Eglatina? But no one would say. It was only Pod who knew the way through the intersecting passages to the hole under the clock, and only Pod could open the gates. There were complicated clasps made of hairpins and safety pins, of which Pod alone knew the secret. His wife and child led more sheltered lives in home-like apartments under the kitchen, far removed from the risks and dangers of the dreaded house above. But there was a grating in the brick wall of the house just below the floor level of the kitchen above, through which Arrietty could see the garden, a piece of graveled path, and a bank where crocus bloomed in spring, when blossom drifted from an unseen tree, and later an azalea bush would flower, and where birds came and pecked and flirted and sometimes fought. The hours you waste on them birds, Homily would say, and when there's a little job to be done, you can never find the time. I was brought up in a house, Homily went on, where there was no grating, and we were all the happier for it. Now go off and get me the potato. That was the day when Arrietty, rolling the potato before her from the storehouse down the dusty lane under the floorboards, kicked it ill-temperedly so that it rolled rather fast into the kitchen, where Homily was stooping over the stove. There you go again, exclaimed Homily, turning angrily, nearly pushed me into the soup. And when I say potato, I don't mean the whole potato. Take the scissor, can't you, and cut off a slice? Didn't know how much you wanted, mumbled Arrietty, and Homily, snorting and sniffling, unhooked the blade and a handle of a half pair of manicure scissors from a nail on the wall and began to cut through the peel. You ruined this potato, she grumbled. You can't roll it back now in all that dust, not once it's been opened. Oh, what does it matter? Said Arrietty. There's plenty more. That's a nice way to talk. Plenty more. Do you realize, Homily went on gravely, lying down the half nail scissor, that your poor father risks his life every time he borrows potato? I mean, said Arrietty, that there are plenty more in the storeroom. Well, out of my way, said Homily, busting around again and again. Arrietty wandered through the open door, and the fire had been lighted, and the room looked bright and cozy. Homily was proud of her sitting room. The walls had been papered with scraps of old letters out of waste paper baskets, and Homily had arranged the handwriting sideways in vertical stripes which ran from floor to ceiling. On the walls, repeated various colors, hung several portraits of Queen Victoria as a girl. These were postage stamps borrowed by Pod some years ago from the stamp box on the desk in the morning room. There was a lacquer trinket box padded inside with the lid open, which they used as a settle, and that useful standby, a chest of drawers made of matchboxes. There was a round table with a red velvet cloth, which Pod made from the wooden bottom of a pillbox, supported on the carved pedestal of a knight from the chess set. This had caused a great deal of trouble upstairs when Aunt Sophie's eldest son, on a flying midweek visit, had invited the vicar for a game after dinner. Rosa Pickhatchet, who was housemaid at the time, gave in her notice. After she had left, other things were found to be missing, and no one was engaged in her place. From that time onwards, Mrs. Driver ruled supreme. The night itself, its bust, so to speak, stood on a column in the corner, where it looked very fine and lent that air to the room which only a statue can give. So we've just learned about Mrs. May, Kate, Pod, Arrietty, and Homily. These are some of the vocabulary words that are used. Untidy, messy, self-willed. So Kate describes herself as stubborn and determined what you want. Crunch, so she crunches her teeth, or else it's a sound from eating chips. Toast, bread that has been sliced, made crisp. Marmalade is a sweet jelly containing pieces of fruit. Silvery, that was the light when it was getting darker in the sitting room or the breakfast room. Shiny and white and light colored and silver. Twilight, the period when day is ending and night is beginning. Sadness, not happy, showing grief or unhappiness. Tea time, British, the usual time for afternoon meal, known as tea, late afternoon or early evening. Crochet, a method of making cloth by clothing by using a needle with a hook at the end to form and weave loops in the thread. Joint, a point where bodies meet in two bones meet in the body. Rustling, to make a soft, light sound because parts of something are touching or rubbing against each other. Tissue, a piece of soft, very thin paper that is used especially for cleaning. Woolen, made of wool. Borrowers, to take and use something that belongs to someone else for a period of time before returning it. Moment, a very short period of time. Because, for that reason, disappear, to stop being visible, to pass out of sight. Safety pins, metal pin that is used for attaching things that has a point on one end and a cover at the other into which the pointed end fits. Factories, buildings or groups of buildings where products are made. Needles, a small, very thin object that is used in sewing that has a sharp point at one end and a hole for the thread. Pencils, all instruments used for writing and drawing that has a hard outer part and a black or colored center part. Matchboxes. Now, we call matchboxes little cars in the US, but these are actual boxes that they put matches in. A small box for matches, sealing wax, a type of wax, especially in the past for making seals on letters and documents. Hairpins, a pin that is worn in your hair, especially a pin shaped like a U that is worn to hold your hair in place. Drawing pins, a British thumbtack. Thimbles, a small metal or plastic cap used in sewing to protect the fingers that pushes the needle. Hat pins, a kind of pin used in the past to help women hold their hats to their hair. Blotting paper, soft, thick paper used to dry wet ink. Weapon, a gun, knife, club, or bomb. So in this situation, they're talking about the hat pins are used as weapons. Nonsense. Words, ideas that are foolish or untrue. Hesitated, to stop briefly. You do something especially because you're nervous, unsure what to do. Startled, surprised, frightened, suddenly not, and usually not serious. Glance, look at someone very quickly. Gazed, to look at someone or something in a steady way, usually for a long time. Downstairs, from a high place to a low place. Hassock, a cushion or soft stool that is used as a seat or for resting your feet. And tease, impress, to cause someone to feel admiration or interest. India, country in Asia. Rheumatic fever, a serious disease, especially when young people, that causes fever, swelling and pain in joints, and sometimes damage to the heart. Term at school, one of the parts of the school year. Handkerchief, a small cloth for wiping your face or nose. Self-willed, stubborn and determined. And these we already went through. And these are the themes. One of the main ones is imagination and wonder. The opening chapter highlights the importance of imagination, particularly through Kate's fascination with the idea of borrowers. Mrs. May's storytelling ignites Kate's curiosity, prompting her to wonder about the unseen aspects of her world. The theme suggests how childhood imagination can transform the mundane into the extraordinary, encouraging readers to see magic in everyday life. Belonging and identity. The borrowers struggle with their identity as they exist in a world that views them as insignificant. Their reliance on borrowing from humans reflects a desire to belong in a larger world, while also underscoring their distinctness as a family unit. Their interplay between their hidden life and the human world raises questions about what it means to belong and how identity can be shaped by one's environment. Survival and resourcefulness. The borrowers must constantly navigate a world filled with danger, emphasizing themes of survival and resourcefulness. Pod's effort to borrow necessary items from humans highlight the creativity and cunning required to survive in hostile environments. This theme invites readers to anticipate ingenuity, adaptability, and reflecting on how individuals respond to challenges. The passage of time and memory. Mrs. May reflects on her brother. The reflections on her brother evoke themes of memory and the passage of time. Her recounting of stories from her childhood demonstrates how memories shape our understanding of the past and influence our perception of reality. The blend of nostalgia and with imagination invites readers to consider how stories connect generations, revealing both personal and shared histories. Human nature and perception. The interaction between humans and borrowers serve as a commentary on human nature and perception. The borrowers view humans as unaware tools for their needs, suggesting a complex relationship between the two worlds. This theme explores how perceptions shape our understanding of others, prompting readers to question their assumptions about those who are different or unseen. Danger and security. The fear surrounding the borrower's existence highlights themes of danger and security. Their lives are marked by risk associated with being discovered by humans or household pets, leading to precarious existence. This theme uncovers the idea that safety often comes from routine and careful living, which is crucial for both humans and borrowers alike. And here's two quotes. And there can't be, and yet sometimes I think. He thought human beings were just invented to do the dirty work, great slaves put there for them to use. Borrowing as survival. The act of borrowing represents not only survival for the borrowers, but also a deeper commentary on human dependence on material possessions. The small world versus the big world. The contrast between the vast human world above and the tiny hidden world of the borrowers symbolizes the unseen magic that exists in everyday life. Routine as a safeguard. Routine serves as a metaphor for stability and safety, indicating how predictability can create a sense of security in both human and borrowers' lives. I hope you enjoyed the first chapter and the beginning of the second chapter of The Borrowers.